Awesome. I noticed some people throwing in where they're at. We'd love to hear where everybody's calling in from. Today you have with you me. My name is David Malmborg. I am VP of Marketing in our communities at Nivati. And with me, I have Haeli Harris, who's our lead clinician and a licensed family and marriage therapist who will be with us and teaching us today. We're excited to have this conversation. We're really going to be talking about boundaries, the effects boundaries have on mental health, and really hopefully some takeaways and things we can look at on teaching managers how to respect and promote boundary setting within the company, which will hopefully allow your employees to feel better and get more work done, really, when all is said and done. So without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, Haeli.
Hi, so happy to be here.
Let's see if I can figure out how to change screens here. There we go. All right. Here is, for those that want this, I believe these decks are getting shared. If not, I'll post, you're welcome to reach out to either one of us. We can share the deck and content as we get going here. Or I'll talk to Chris to make sure it gets shared where necessary, or hit me up in the Q&A or chat. And of course, I can also send you these if you guys need. Okay, so what if I told you that there was a way to reduce burnout amongst your employees, reduce their stress, maybe build better working relationships, all while promoting employee autonomy? These are all the things that boundary setting can actually do for you. And so this is why we're talking about it. It is a very important component to making sure you have a rich culture, but also allowing employees to feel valued in the workspace. And so before we get too far down the path, we're going to have Haeli come in and talk to us a lot about what boundaries are, how do boundaries help emotional and mental health, kind of what that link is between boundary setting and emotional health, what makes good boundaries, and then we'll get into the part about promoting a culture of boundary setting within the office. All right, Haeli, I'll turn it over to you and let you lead us in what boundaries are.
Okay. I'm really excited to talk about boundaries. I do think that boundaries has become a lot more of a word being shared when it comes to mental health. As David mentioned, I'm a marriage and family therapist, so I do individual therapy as well as relationships, and boundaries of course shows up in relationships, definitely, but we also want to think of boundaries in other ways as it applies to our life and ways that it can help with our mental health. So let's start by defining what boundaries actually are. Think of a boundary as a line, this invisible line that is between you and behaviors that are acceptable. These behaviors can vary in very many different things. So it can be physical space, your feelings, your needs, things like that. There's a bunch of different examples here as far as all the different ways that boundaries can apply. A lot of the time when people hear the word boundaries, they usually think of two things. They often think of a physical boundary, where it's, don't touch me, don't come in my bubble. We have the bubbles and we don't want people there. And then a lot of people hear the word between boundary and work, which that is a great boundary to keep in mind. And that's one that we'll be talking a lot about today. But all of these different types of boundaries are going to come into play when we're talking about setting healthy boundaries. So we also have things based on time. I need time to process, or I need time to figure out what's going on inside of me. I need time to think about things before I respond and react. But then that can also be time and space when it comes to work, as far as taking time away from work, creating that boundary there as well. Some other ones is the material piece. I always talk about materials when it comes to boundaries, because that is things like setting a boundary with our phones, our notifications, our emails, and things like that. Other ones can include our energy. I need to step away from this, as well, as emotional and responsibility. So these are various types of boundaries. And when it comes to the way that boundaries affect a person's mental health, we know that unhealthy boundaries really do play a role in a person's mental health. Oftentimes when people have mental health disorders that I see in therapy, things like depression and anxiety, PTSD, we often see poor boundaries, and part of our therapy is trying to help them create healthier boundaries so that they can have better mental health. So these create a happier, healthier relationships and an overall well-being. Boundaries allow people to be true to who they are inside of themselves. It puts in that line. If we think about that line, it puts that line in from us overextending and doing too much. I am a really big victim of overextending myself. Actually, I should say I used to be terrible at overextending myself. I've gotten a lot better with it because my body, my mental health and physical health kind of was like, hey, we're tired of this. You treat us like crap, so we're going to just shut off for you. And so I was kind of forced to have to put healthier boundaries in place. But boundaries help create expectations for you and for yourself. When we have those boundaries defined, it's so much easier for us to gain a better understanding of what we want to happen in our lives and around us. For example, when I work with people putting boundaries in place for family members, it's a really helpful way for them to be able to say, okay, I need to step away from this person when this happens. And that's a great way for them to create a very clear expectation. And when we set those, we actually improve our mental well-being. These are some other ways on here that boundaries can help improve mental health. One of the big things too is boundaries allow you to let go of worrying about how others will feel. A lot of people, we're going to talk about people pleasing, but a lot of people really struggle with putting boundaries in place because they don't want to hurt other people's feelings. So when we're able to do that, we're able to say, hey, I matter too, and I'm going to put myself first in a non-selfish way, of course, by implementing healthier boundaries. When it comes to boundaries, people without boundaries are more likely to experience higher stress levels and are more likely to burn out because it is impacting their mental health. Actually, and switch to the next slide, a study had found that when employees feel that they have time to do their work, when they put those boundaries in place, they are 70% less likely to experience the high burnout. Burnout is a word I hear a lot, especially in my HR support groups. I run those twice a month. I love those groups. And I hear this so often is the employees are experiencing burnout and the HR people are experiencing burnout. And so one of the ways that we really want to help people less likely to burn out is to help people implement healthier boundaries. So let's start by talking about what stops employees from creating boundaries. Why is it so hard for people to do this? The first one is that we don't want to be that person. We don't want to be that person that kind of gets the rap and, says, no, I don't want to do this, or respect my space. For some reason, some people look down on those people or think negatively of them. So that's one of the reasons. Another common reason that I come across a lot is this people pleaser. We want to make everybody happy. We want to be able to show that we can do everything. We want to please everybody, especially when we don't like conflict or contention. We are more likely to have unhealthy boundaries. For some people, it's just not worth the hassle. I do that. That's one that I definitely can be guilty of sometimes, where it's just easier for me to be like, whatever, I don't care. I'm not going to do it, which that can be a great quality and a great thing to do. But we really want to balance that and saying, do I do that too much to the point where I'm just getting run over?
Yes, I do.
Thanks, David.
Sorry, I just had to comment. That's where I'm guilty for sure.
Yeah. And I want you guys to think of where you're guilty with these, because I think it's really helpful for us to call this out on ourselves so that then we can help other people see this too. It's okay for others. Why isn't it okay for me? So this really turns into a me problem. Another example, which I should say with that one also, that the me problem. So not everybody's boundaries are the same. Some people have different boundaries. Some people have different lines. That invisible line, it's going to look different for other people. So it can get kind of hard to put boundaries in place when it's like, hey, I don't care if my boss messages me on a Sunday. Why do they care? So really thinking of it that it's going to look different. Boundaries look different for everybody, and that's okay. We want people to put their boundaries in place that help them with their mental health. It can be scary I know this one too. It can be scary to say, no, I cannot do that right now. Or when we're setting boundaries in place with family, it can be really scary to have to say, I don't want to have these types of conversations with you anymore. That's part of the people pleasing, is that we avoid that conflict. And we don't want to, ruffle any feathers. So really thinking of, are you someone that sets boundaries because you are worried about saying something and speaking up? Another one is a lot of people don't know how to set boundaries. I've even had someone say, I don't even know what boundaries, like what are boundaries as far as what I should put in place? What are healthy boundaries? I don't even know where to begin. They just kind of let everybody run all over them. And this really does lead, all of these can stem from that a lot of people switch sides, as far as a lot of people lack self-confidence because of lacking self-esteem, self-respect, and self-worth. It's not to say that if you have unhealthy boundaries, it's because you don't have any self-esteem or self-worth. It's not that, but there is a root that we like to, in therapy, we like to kind of dig down to and say, why are we not putting these boundaries in place? Do we not feel that our time, or that ourselves, our body, whatever it is, do we not feel that those are worth putting these boundaries in place? And if we don't, why? And generally, it leads down to that at the stem of it all. So in talking about what makes a good boundary, the first thing, we're going to talk about 6 different ways that make really good, healthy boundaries. And then David's going to talk about how to have your managers and how to help people put these boundaries in place. So the first one that we want to talk about is being very specific with our boundaries. This is what it gets hard. It can be very difficult to do these kinds of things. So it would be something like, if this happens, then this will be the result. So if my mother calls and complains about so-and-so, then I will tell her, and this is where it gets scary, right? I will tell her that I do not want to have these conversations about so-and-so. And that can be scary for a lot of people. And this can be at work too. If my boss emails me on a Sunday morning, I will respond the next day, letting them know that my work hours are Monday through Friday, whatever times. And that's when I respond to emails. And I would even also push it to say, please email me during those times and not when I'm not working. Okay, the next one we want to talk about is not setting, don't think that would apply well. Yeah, that's where we have to be very careful. And that's also why when David comes in, he's going to talk more about how do we get people to be more understanding and let this fly better, because that's what we want. We want to create a culture where we can implement healthy boundaries, because overall it's going to improve employees' mental health. So with these boundaries, don't set boundaries that we're not willing to put into place. That's a matter of self-respect for you and respecting your own boundaries. I know that can be very difficult. I hear people say all the time that they're going to do this and they're going to do this. I do think effort should be taken into consideration because it's hard to do this stuff, but really thinking which ones are actually enforceable. I can't ignore my mother's phone call. Well, I can, I guess, but I'm not going to realistically ignore my mother's phone calls just because she might talk about so-and-so. So really just thinking about what's realistic in setting those boundaries, which I actually think might be one of the next slides. The third one is one of David's favorites, giving praise when boundaries are respected. Praise people when they do things well. The dog training effect. So, you train your dog for good behavior. We give them a treat when they do something good. I loved it when David said that to me because I was like, well, I think of more with kids. I praise my kids when they do something good. But we can think of it as a dog training effect as well. So, someone emails me during my work hours. Actually, I'm going to give you an example. I did this with David the other day. I was working on Sunday night and I scheduled a Slack message to send to David at like the next morning at 7 a.m. because I was respecting his boundaries. And he'd sent me some other messages before or after. And so it looked like I was kind of ignoring his messages when I did the auto because I wasn't even awake when I sent it. And I told him later, I said, hey, just so you know, that was auto send. And David said, thank you for respecting my boundaries. So right there, training me to respect his boundaries by giving me praise for my respecting his own boundaries. So yeah. The next one is avoid moralizing your boundaries. This ones are the don't should on yourself or others when it comes to boundaries. So kind of in this way, right or wrong, other people behave in certain ways. We might not agree with a person's behaviors, so he should know better than to do this, or I shouldn't have to do this. It's very understandable, very valid, but trying to not get caught up in the shoulds and instead trying to think of what can I control in these situations. I can control putting a healthy boundary in place. That's what I can control. I can't control the behaviors of this other person. Number 5 is defining why you are putting your boundaries into place. This is a big, the root of this one is going to come from your values. So understanding what's important to you and let that be known to the people around you. So my time with my kids is important to me. So that is why I set my time boundaries. On the evenings or the weekends when I'm with them, I'm going to have a boundary in place where I put my phone on silent or I don't respond to emails. And I will ask others when I am with my kids to respect my time and know that that's very important to me. So that's a really helpful way to make good, healthy boundaries. And don't shoot on yourself. It is very memorable. I love it. And really what I want you guys to keep in mind when it comes to boundary setting and when we're teaching other people about healthy boundaries and how to put those in place is it is very hard. We can talk about it. You guys hear it and you're like, yeah, this is great. But I mean, somebody said, yeah, that wouldn't fly well because putting these boundaries into place is actually very difficult. It becomes difficult because if we've never had boundaries, it's really hard for the people in our lives to make that adjustment because all of a sudden we're saying, hey, there's this line here. And that's a big change for them. And a lot of people have a hard time with those kind of changes. So that's going to be hard at first. So if it's baby steps, that's really understandable. Also putting in boundaries into place when it comes to, I'm not going to get my notifications. I'm going to work on scheduling sends and things like that. Put that boundary between home life, work life. Really, that's so much easier said than done. It becomes difficult to do a lot at once. So I usually work with clients. We do maybe one new boundary a week. if that. Sometimes that one boundary might have to go for a couple weeks because it can be so hard to implement. So keep in mind, don't get discouraged if you're struggling to put these boundaries into place. And then I often tell people too, we might be doing really great with a boundary. Then we kind of get back into old habits, which happens. And so we kind of fall down a little bit with the boundary keeping. That's okay. Let's just recognize, hey, I'm not doing so great with my boundaries. I need to get back up and put these back into place. And then we get back up, because it really is a long process to keep these to create these into a way of living instead. So those are some 6 tips on making good, healthy boundaries. David's going to now talk about creating a culture of boundary setting.
Thank you, Haeli. It's great to be able to work with Haeli because I learn a lot, and especially around boundaries. When we were looking at today's topic, I kind of suggested, or today's theme for the event, I suggested this topic, and I kind of like rolled my eyes a little bit because I have, just a little transparency, a sister-in-law who really is like, she moralizes her boundaries, which we said not to do. And that's important because otherwise it gets really annoying when somebody always brings up the word boundaries. However, what I've learned over this time is like, this is really an important part of what we as a culture and a society do and need to do, right? It's what makes humanity humanity. And so I really actually have grown to love this topic quite a bit. And we're going to talk about why this is important for the office, and really what you as HR executives and team members do is making sure that we have an office that works together, right? And it's really important for the culture. We've talked about this and we hear this a lot with the HR folks. Burnout's a big issue. Stress is a huge issue, right? The Great Resignation is a real deal because people are burned out and they don't want to experience that. And boundary setting has a lot to do with that, right? When people are burned out or stressed, 63% more likely to take a sick day, right? They're 50% less likely to discuss goals with managers, which is really kind of just leading to a larger problem, ultimately to the point of where they're less confident in their performance, and 2.6 times more likely to leave their job. Hence why we call this time the Great Resignation. And you guys have all experienced this and see this, and the cost for the company when it comes to replacing individuals is really great. And so what we wanted to talk about today is really just understanding ways that you can promote better boundary setting within the office. And the managers who do this will end up having, better teams, healthier teams, and actually might find themselves getting more work done with less time. So a couple of things that we do here. Oh, excuse me. It's really confusing to change the screen and look at this. Okay, so this is our CEO, Amelia Wilcox, who was originally supposed to be presenting here with you today, but in her email, she has this note in the footer of her email. It's in her signature. It's called a truly human notice. And this is something that she promotes in our office. We're 100% remote office. Both Haeli and I are out of Salt Lake City, but we have team members from across the country. And Amelia, who is a working mom, she has 3 great daughters and a husband who's a firefighter. And so when he's on for 3 days straight. And so oftentimes is alone for a part of the week, right? And so she has this particular signature, which gets complimented a lot. And it's something that we really promote throughout. And it says, getting this email out of normal working hours. We work in a digitally enabled world, constantly balancing family career, which can disrupt our ability to sleep enough, eat right, exercise, and spend time with the people that matter most. I'm sending you this email at a time that works for me. I also expect you to respond to it when it's convenient to you. And that's really the important part, is understanding, especially with remote employees or everybody, that everybody's just working different hours. When it works, different time zones even can cause this issue. And just reinforcing every single time you send a message out that this is what works for me, just respond when it works for you, I think is really great. Now, you can also, I highly recommend that we do Oh, I put a transition in here. We also really focus a lot on Slack statuses or chat statuses, whatever it is that you're using. And particularly around your availability to talk or be interrupted. This is really important. I have a status here that I will use. It says I'm heads down, and so please interrupt me with care. You can see technology is actually coming with do not disturbs and things like that. I don't necessarily love using that. Everybody's different, but because there are times where I may need to be interrupted when something is going on. Slack statuses can go a really long way in terms of understanding exactly what is happening with an individual and how they should not be interrupted or chatted with. The other thing, though, is, and Haeli mentioned this earlier, is we at the company really promote the concept of actually doing scheduled messaging. You can do scheduled messaging in Slack. You can do scheduled messaging with Gmail or with most mail clients, where you are actually scheduling the mail to be delivered, the email to be delivered at a time that is, common working hours, whatever that may be. And so it just kind of depends. I personally don't have this habit, which is why I was chatting Haeli at Sunday. And then I all of a sudden got a response to a bunch of stuff on Monday morning when I came in. And so it just kind of depends. What I would recommend is with any one of these particular technologies or tools, or however you want to do it, every team's going to be just a little bit different, but I would really recommend that your managers understand what's available and start setting precedences and teaching their teams what may or may not be acceptable. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. The last thing I wanted to really note in this topic, as far as like the culture side of things, is there's a lot of studies actually showing the younger generation are taking the boundaries more seriously. And what they're doing is, you can see in this graph, I don't know if you can read that super well across the screens, but you have baby boomers, X, millennials, and Z, and basically showing lower values as far as the percentage of people in that age range that are setting up their boundaries properly. That means even taking breaks away from work or spending less time on social media. So not necessarily work related, but just generally spend their own personal time. Saying no to social activities to focus on themselves. That one I find interesting, where you see Gen Z, 20%, almost a quarter of Gen Z are taking time walking away from social events so that they can focus on themselves. The baby boomers, that's only that 10 to 12% range, which is really kind of an interesting concept, I think, where the older generation, and myself as well, like wouldn't pass up time to go be in a social situation. Spend time or watch the news for whatever reason. That's the way things kind of rolling there. And so you can see the older generation not necessarily putting those hard boundaries in place, and the younger generation very much expecting it. We see this with the younger generation in terms, on the whole, just taking mental health more serious. And Haeli could talk about that in a whole nother conversation about what the younger generation is doing for their mental health needs and requirements. You guys probably are seeing this on the recruiting side as well, some of the requirements that they want in their benefits. It's really, there's three primary ways that you can violate boundaries. I only bring this up to mention for your managers and for your teams to understand that you can violate boundaries. And when boundaries are set, again, we're going to talk a little bit more about what's needed to communicate this. But what we find, or what I think is really interesting, is you can aggressively break a boundary or violate a boundary, passive aggressive, or accidental, right? It happens. Everybody does that. The more aggressive the actual violation and continual violation of boundaries, the more stressed and the more burnt out, the quicker your employees are actually going to burn out. And so sometimes it might process like, I was only Gene. Stuff really adds up over time. And so I would avoid trying to violate boundary, especially in the more aggressive manner or passive aggressive. Both Haeli and I are from Utah, and the passive aggressive is like the culture here in Utah. I don't know if it's that way everywhere in the country, but Utah is definitely a passive aggressive culture here. It's how we like to meet our boundaries. Okay, let's see. Going on to the next slide here. For boundaries that actually work. I think it was Winnie, right, who said that wouldn't fly. Who was talking about, like, don't email me on Sunday. Totally get that. What's really important when it comes to boundaries, the whole in the office is really about communication and understanding. And then there's definitely times where like we have maybe an ideal boundary and maybe our boundaries need to be a little bit more flexible for the office, depending on emergencies, fires, whatever is happening and going on. But what should be important is all of that has been communicated beforehand. Expectations should be set with employees, with managers, with team members, so that we all understand kind of where we're at, we're all on the same page. So we're going to talk a little bit about the communication that's required there. Obviously, clearly communicate and ask questions. The more the managers and the employees of those teams can actually communicate and understand what's important to the employee and why it's important to the employee, the better. And that's one of the main things that you should be covering in one-on-ones, right? I think every company really preaches the need to have one-on-ones with employees, or maybe even skip levels. And these are the type of things that you can understand. Is like, okay, team member, here's expectations, here's boundaries that I have, what do you have, why you have that, what can we do to make sure everybody's on the same page. Accepting what employee is communicating is valid. The validity of what the boundary is really one of the most important things that you can do. We talk a lot, and I think Haeli's step 5, right, says it's important to clarify the why behind the boundary. I think the boundary setter, whoever that happens to be, I think it is important to clarify why that boundary exists. For managers, though, it's not necessarily the manager's job to have the employee justify why that boundary exists. There's a distinct difference there, and I want to make sure that that's understood. Sure, the boundary setter can go ahead and clarify why they have that boundary for whatever reason it may be, and that reason is valid. Whether you like it or not, it's a valid reason for that individual. But I, as a manager, shouldn't go to Haeli and say, now tell me why. Like, you need to justify that. We shouldn't demand that justification for that boundary. Otherwise, I'm going to blow right by it. And I think that's really important. Respecting the autonomy of the other people is really important. This is why nobody likes micromanagers. I don't think. Is that true? You HR people probably know this a lot better. Does anybody like a micromanager? I really don't think so. And that's because the micromanager doesn't let people solve their own problems on their own terms. And that is becoming more and more important, especially for remote employees. This is the other thing for, I think, everybody, but especially for managers to understand is continue to work on yourself, right? Demonstrate to you that you're a trustworthy and respectful person, and you are that person that can respect and understand the boundaries of your employees, and work to understand those and follow those boundaries where necessary. And again, that just builds, I think, a better relationship with not only the employee-manager relationship, but just general humanity. Haeli mentioned this, but it's also important to understand that everybody's boundaries are different. I didn't mind getting an email. I wouldn't mind getting an email on a Sunday. I may or may not respond to that email. That's where I draw the line, but you can send me whatever you want on the weekends. You know, everybody's different. For some people, that doesn't fly very well. Whatever the case may be, as the manager, I actually know I know what my team members on my team specifically, I know what their boundaries are when it comes to off-hour communication, and I cater to that where I need to. And when I don't cater to that, it usually comes with an apology quickly thereafter, or understanding like, hey, this is a little bit of an emergency, FYI. You know, I kind of set the expectation of why I'm violating that boundary. Completely wait until the other person is finished speaking. Okay, so this one I think is, I was super guilty of this, and I had no idea that this was the case. I was running a marketing agency before I joined Nivati here, and our creative director is a really great guy. Him and I got along super well, and whatnot. And what I found is when we were doing some collaboration meetings or whatnot, he would start talking, and he's very thoughtful and methodical about the way he speaks. It's part of the creativity side, making sure the point is clearly laid out, whatever that is. Me, on the other hand, can be a little bit impatient, and I found myself often going in and interrupting and kind of finishing his thought, because I knew where he was going, and I just finished the thought and said, okay, but here's the counterpoint, or whatever the case may be. And I remember like the first week that I was working with him, and I naturally was just doing this, he raised his hand. I think you can see my video. He raised his hand. He said, please let me finish my thought. And I was like, that was weird, but okay, continue on. And he did that often. And what ended up happening is I didn't realize how frequently I would interrupt people when they were completing the thought. And I didn't realize, like, as I was having this relationship with our creative director, and he would constantly tell me, please let me finish my thought, I'd be, it didn't take long for me to realize, like, man, I really interrupt this guy a lot. And it changed the way I talk to people. Completing, letting people completely, or excuse me, let me read this. Completely waiting for the other person to finish speaking before you go in and actually respond is actually a great habit to get into. And I would do this as management training. And I have actually raised my hand and say, please let me finish my thought a couple of times now. And it's something that I've gotten into. What happens is when somebody actually finishes a sentence or their thought, you take a deep breath in and then exhale slowly. You all of a sudden have removed assumptions, which is what I was doing. I was assuming I knew where he was going with the thought. Oftentimes I was wrong, or the reactivity of what you wanted to say, and you actually like process it a little bit more. So letting them completely finish, I think, is really important. Super incredible skill in communicating, and I didn't realize it until a couple of years ago that I suck at that. Okay.
And can I say on that, I think that's great. Putting a boundary in place for that other person that puts their hand up. That's them putting a boundary into place. Saying,
yeah, on the fly.
I will not let people interrupt me. So that's a good boundary. So
yeah, it was incredible. I had never had anybody do that to me before, and anyways, changed the way I talk to people. It was really great. So please let me finish my thought. I'm just kidding. You guys are doing great. Speaking of, though, if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in. There's the Q&A section. I know there's a good chance some of you might have questions for Haeli. She'll have all those answers prepared if we run into time. If not, I know the session ends in about 8 minutes or so. We can go ahead and chat back and forth as you maybe go into other sessions, or email us if you want your questions. I'm happy to look at it there. Okay. Important to understand, remote employees are at greater risk. And so we can't really stress this enough. Most companies have stuck to a hybrid or maybe a fully remote staff. And your remote employees are at greater risk from not having proper boundaries, right? This stat came out by Blue Jeans from Verizon in a study that showed in 2020, so when we all started going remote for the first time, for many of us, we on average we're working 3.13 hours longer than when we were in the office. Why is that? Because we didn't have to necessarily rush off to have dinner, or we could run up the stairs real fast, have dinner, and then head back down to the office, right? Like, not having that commute like changed a lot of boundary settings, and we weren't able to actually like step away, which is crazy. That's a lot of hours, you know, times that by 5, if not 6 days. And you're really looking at about 18 extra hours of work that just naturally came when we all switched. This is where, for HR folks here in the room, which I think is about all of us here, this is actually where your role can make and shape boundary setting within the office. So this came from Deloitte, and it talks about the top factors of making remote work sustainable is actually around work design. And this is where you guys have a say in what work design actually looks like. And so if you look at this list that they give, much of this list can be kind of distilled to a version of boundary setting, maybe one way or the other. So introducing digital collaboration platforms, probably not, but allowing for personal choice in determining how work gets done, definitely boundary setting. Establishing new scheduling and meeting norms, definitely boundary setting. Investing in new leader training, maybe not, but leader training is always good. Providing home access to the internet and needed technologies, maybe not. Reconfiguring the physical workspace at home, definitely boundary setting. Providing enhanced corporate benefits, maybe not, but we all recommend adding benefits of mental health into your company. If you need to do that, come talk to us. We'll talk to you about that. Offering new well-being sources and resources, again, come talk to us about that, where we'll teach you about boundary setting. Boundary setting is really important to make that work design work for remote employees. However, not all is bad. There was a survey that came last year, again, from the same Deloitte survey here that said 7 out of 10 managers say, or not managers, but the executives say their organization should remote work has had a positive impact on well-being. I think it took a little bit to figure out, but generally speaking, when you remove the 30 to 60-minute commutes off of people's lives, and whatever the case may be, allowing a little bit more flexibility on when they're on and off, you can definitely see, and I've been a benefit of a remote work shift. I think there's some other, some cons to it as well, but overall, not all is bad by going fully remote. And then the last thought is a lot of boundary settings, a lot of boundaries in the office are actually going to start going beyond just managers and the HR team, right? What we're talking about here are actual other teams or things out of our control that might actually start forcing us to set boundaries, good or bad, I don't know. But you guys may be familiar with this. Legal might have something to say about this. In 2017, there was a French law limiting the extent to which workers can be required to answer phone calls or emails during non-work hours. All right, just gonna confess this out right now. I'm a big fan, guilty pleasure, of Emily in Paris on Netflix. Anybody watch that? It's actually a really big talking point within that show about how Emily, an American, tries to do some work over the weekend and the French counterparts totally shut her down on that, which I think is really interesting. You say what you want. It's an interesting take. We'll see how other legal things come into play there, but the laws might change where some of this might be tough, just setting boundaries for us. I found this one to be really interesting. Tech might have a lot to say about what boundaries are. There's a new thing called mail on holiday, a new setting that a lot of mail servers are starting to put in place, where emails that are sent to people out of office are automatically deleted. That seems so crazy to me. And the system sends an auto reply that suggests alternative people that you can talk to, or tell them you can respond or resend your email at this time and I will respond. This is a crazy concept, but the concept of boundary setting is really, it's great if you can do it at a cultural level. There are components that are coming out that just might take some of this out of our hands for good or bad, but you're going to be better off if you can actually make boundary setting part of your culture. And that, my friends, is what we have you today. I'll leave you with this quick hit list. I'll let Haeli walk through this quick hit list of things that we didn't talk about, but things that can also be very important for your boundary setting. Haeli, go for it.
Yeah, so these are just some things that we can try setting and encourage others in the workplace to do as well when it comes to boundaries. Creating a schedule and a routine, turning off our notifications. Sometimes it might even be taking off the work emails from our phone so they don't even go to our phone. But you can always change notification settings on those. Keep at least one day a week that is free from all work. You don't even check. Have a commute if you work from home, where maybe it's just a walk outside, or I like to go into my bedroom and sometimes enjoy a piece of chocolate, and that's my little commute before I go into my next piece of day. And if you work from home, encouraging people to have different spaces for work that they do for rest, and not putting those two together. Okay.
All right.
That is everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So just a quick, the only thing we're going to mention, Nivati, we are a single platform for body and mind. We're a mental health platform designed to give more supportive, preventative, proactive mental health support to the employees. If that is something you guys need for your company, please feel free to reach out. Again, I know some people have mentioned about wanting access to slides. I'm happy to send copies. I don't know what From Day One does with slides. I've shared it with them. Maybe they share it with you. If not, though, feel free to email me. I'm happy to send you a copy of the slides. And then the last call to action I'll give you, or shout out, is Haeli mentioned we do have a support group for HR team members. It basically is like group therapy for HR people. Haeli does it. It's totally free. I will drop a link here in the chat here in just a minute. But if you want to have a regular conversation with Haeli and do a little bit of group therapy with other HR people across the country, feel free to sign up for that. They're really great conversations. We do them every 2 weeks, I think. With that, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you enjoyed the rest of your conference with From Day One. We are out of time, technically speaking, but Haeli and I are happy to stay on board and answer any questions if you all want to throw questions either in the QA or the chat section. So we're happy to hang out as long as you need. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Give that link for the HR support.
Obviously, I was going to do that. Let's do that.
Question, is Nivati available in Canada? And also Haeli's HR group session. David's grabbing that link for the HR, and Nivati is available in Canada. I know I have counselors in Canada as well. Okay, link for that HR support group is in the chat.
Yeah, so all that does is just fill out the form there, and then we'll send you the details and send you a calendar invite with the Zoom link. It's really informal. It's all done through Haeli, and hopefully you guys find value in that. We've got quite a few regulars in there now. It's becoming a good group. So.
It's a fun group. Okay.
Did I miss any questions? Was there anything else?
Just that one.
Oh, it looks like Chris pinned that to the top, the support group, so that's great.
I didn't see any other questions.
Hey, thank you all again, and feel free to drop questions as you need. Otherwise, enjoy your time here.